Well, it's wonderful
Hey,
to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great. So let's get into your good work. And before we do that, one of the biggest things that hit all of us 5 years ago was this pandemic. And I'm
Mm,
curious, how did you make it through that time period, and how has it reverberated into what you do today?
I love that question.
Yeah, good.
So I believe that we have entered into what I call the age of intuition.
Yeah.
I've heard some people talk about pre-COVID and post-COVID as like kind of a shift in uh, a layer of things that I don't think people are even aware of. Okay, almost other dimensional. Okay.
Yeah.
So and that's kind of a little precursor to what I'll share with you. So I value my intuition, and it's been useful in lots of different ways. But I will tell you a few months before, so it was late 2019. I started working with some pretty advanced, masters of spiritual, tools and I knew that I what I really needed to be doing was focusing more on consciousness,
Yeah.
more on spiritual aspects of mental health. So I was in private practice in mental health, and I closed my doors in May of 2019. And then I just kind of reduced my overhead, took only self-pay clients. So it just really changed. I did not want to deal with insurance anymore.
Yeah.
The frequency of insurance for me was just like not where it was at. And so I just was very selective in the clients I took. And I thought I was going to have a different office in January of 2020, and things didn't line up, and I didn't have anywhere. So I had used up my lease, and I was without an office.
Yeah.
And so I realized, well, what I really need to focus on is finishing my doctorate. And so I had all my research done. It was my final year with Quantum University. And I pretty much decided what I was going to do my research on. And I realized I did not need an office for it. In fact, you say you're from Kansas City. I had several couples, so I decided to do a duplication of my thesis, which was working with couples in conflict using consciousness tools to reduce conflict. And so my three of the couples, I think, were in Kansas.
Okay.
So there you go.
Yeah.
And I realized it was cheaper because I had my mentor with my dissertation was a doctor. She said I had to use a medical measurement. So in the mental health field, that's not really done.
Yeah.
And so I decided, well, I understand blood pressure and heart rate.
Yeah.
So I sent out blood pressure cuffs to all the couples. I had eight, several from Utah, this, three couples from Kansas, and then I think a couple other random locations. And they all got blood pressure cuffs for the pre-post and pre, there was 3 points in the
Yeah.
session that they took their ratings.
Yeah.
And and so this is what was beautiful is that it was all set up ready to go. I had my people in about March of 2020. And if I had had a physical office, I could not have done what I was trying to do.
Right.
It wouldn't have worked. And so I trusted that, there was just this universal knowing and to just go with it. So I don't know if I ended up, I think it was 2021, I might have ended up with an office again, but that whole year I didn't leave the house.
Sure. Yeah.
I got the dissertation done. It was published by July. It was amazing how
Wow.
quickly it happened. Because no, I mean, and think about this. So these couples were not only like they were home,
Yeah.
but they were ready to get on Zoom,
Uh-huh.
and their conflict was at a whole nother level because they were with each other 24/7.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, and that was the way it was. I mean, I mean, if you didn't have something that was brick or mortar, there was a lot of people that were segueing out of that anyway. So it was
Yeah.
almost like kismet that that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So
It
I'm
was, yeah.
curious, right now in 2025, if I put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at career day, and one of the kids
Mhm.
wanted to know exactly what you do for a living, because kids always get the truth out of us, how would
Yeah.
you answer them?
Oh my gosh. So, well, let me share, it's not necessarily 12-year-olds, but I had an amazing opportunity to go into my daughter's psychology class in she was a sophomore at the time
Sure.
in high school. And I spoke to these potentially budding, future helping professionals, right? Because they're all taking psychology in high school, and some of them, that's what I did. I
Yeah.
was taking psychology in high school and later I was in my bachelor's in psychology and then my master's in psychology, right? So what I've learned from all that is that the academic path only gives you a little slice of the pie.
Yeah.
So there is so much more when you're looking to understand a holistic problem than the academic path is providing. And part of that was medical. Like, are we really checking blood pressure in marriage counseling? It needs to be done,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so there's the holistic, you know, path that is different. It's very different than singling out one arena and going down this linear and limited direction. So I've told my own daughter, like, I really would almost rather you don't go to college.
Right.
I would rather you figure out what you're really here to do. And creativity is king right now.
Yeah.
Like, there is so much potential just getting out of the box.
Mhm.
And that's so I don't know that I would tell people what I do because I can't really define it.
Sure.
But I would say how I got here
Yeah.
is by getting out of the box,
So
for sure.
let me ask you this. When you were 12 years old, what was your dream job? What did you want to be when you grew
I
up?
wanted to be a biochemist.
Okay.
So I was fascinated by biochemistry and I knew that there was something to like the chemical nature of things and the biology. And so my biochemistry path took me into drugs because I was chronically my mental health was shot by the time I was in grade school.
Yeah.
And I knew that there was something out there that would change it. And little did I know it was cocaine, you know?
Yeah. Right.
As an 18, 19-year-old, like I found the cure. And it lasted a hot year, a really hot year.
Yeah.
And and I hit bottom and then I had a spiritual awakening. And so what I didn't know up until 19 was it wasn't just biology, it was spirituality
Yeah.
and it was emotional intelligence. And I didn't get that figured out until I was 30, and so the biggest thing I did for my youngest child was start teaching her emotional intelligence at age 3.
Yeah.
So my thesis in my master's program identified this zone of age 3 to 5 was critical or at least impactful in developing emotional intelligence. And that girl is more emotionally intelligent at age 17 than I was at age 35,
Wow.
for sure, hands down.
So let me ask you this. The one thing, getting back to the COVID time, the one outgrowth of that time period is that there's this increased um, uh, acuity into the mental health world. Has that made it easier for you as a professional to get in here? It's almost a little bit more like it's common now. It's not like it hasn't been
That's true.
common before, but now it's kind of opened extra doors, or has it done that?
It's yes, like we don't have to convince people to look at it anymore,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
People are looking at it. The issue is that they're still looking at it through a narrow lens. And I'm my goal right now. So if you ask like what do I do? I would elevate my role as a researcher right now because I've taken a lot of things I developed and fine-tuned and honed in over, like 20 years, really. And some of that's, emotional intelligence tools, meditation techniques, a mind-body clearing technique, that type of thing, and kind of put it all together and it works. And you wouldn't have to have a clinical background to use it.
yeah,
So it works because the system and the techniques work, kind of like EMDR. So if anything has really kind of worked in the mental health world, it's EMDR, and people know about it. The pros and cons of that is you have to not only have your master's, but have already completed licensure, which is another 3 years on top of that for most clinicians to even get trained in it. So since COVID, so this was interesting. I stepped into a drug rehab. So my background, so I had my spiritual awakening. I shifted my bachelor's degree into social work and started, my practicum was actually at a drug rehab. So that's where I got my training. I didn't actually go into treatment because I was literally overnight had been transformed, never
Yeah.
relapsed, never did treatment. And
Yeah.
so my treatment experience was actually as a practicum student. And so I stayed in that field for 10 years until I could only get, I realized I needed a master's to go further. So what I ended up doing is I stepped into a rehab facility here in my area. It was like October 2020. And I invited their staff to come in because I had developed Zero Point Meridian is the name of the tool I developed. I got it accredited internationally. I had the, like the full certification lined out, and it was available to SUDCs. So SUDCs in our state are substance use disorder counselors, and they don't even have bachelor's degrees, but they have experience and they have passion and they want to change the world. And they're, it's like a 1 year program and you can get hired. And so that's, but you can't do a whole lot. Like you can't really do treatment, you can't deal with trauma. And what's like the number one issue of an addict? Well, they have trauma almost in every case, right?
Yeah.
So they were limited in that. And the director of the program had SUDCs and, maybe like one clinician in his staff. And they weren't licensed. They were in internships, right? So nobody in his staff could deliver true trauma treatment. And I showed up, I put this on the platter and said, this is available. But then we ended the conversation with, well, what is it you need here? And he needed a clinical director. So I actually took on the position, even though I was like, kind of done. But I took it on because I wanted to know what was the potential of moving these tools into a program. I didn't want to start my own. I didn't want to have to deal with the overhead and all that. So I wanted to bring it in. And at 6 months of working there, I could see so many barriers. I couldn't even have the conversations I was trying to have, much
Yeah.
less get it going.
Yeah.
So I left, and he actually contacted me a year and a half later and said, I figured it out. He said, I've changed some things. We've got to have more master's level people here. He said, when you were here, everything worked. And these are the things that worked when you were here. And now I need to understand what worked. So I want you back. And that's when he opened the door up. And that's when I started training his staff in the tools that were in consciousness, basically. And so that had potential, but here's the biggest issues. He was CARF accredited. 10 to 20% of all of his time and energy in his staff was going to keeping that accreditation. It was it was inane types of trainings. It was how do you deal with, and it listed, there was like 10 fears, everything that could go wrong and everything you've got to do so that you don't get taken down or put in court or sued.
Yeah.
And 10 to 20% of their time in training was devoted to fear-based, um it's basically backwards from consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And that's what he had to do to keep his status. And then the other half, or like if you were to take 50% of the time, the other 30% of that was all to appease Medicaid and make them happy and make sure that their billing was working.
Yeah.
And then half of the time was devoted to the clients. And so half was bureaucratic and half was actually serving the clients. And that was the problem. And I
Yeah.
still believe it is the problem that I don't even want to get into the ring with that anymore.
Sure. Yeah, well, I get it. So who's been kind of an inspiration for you? Who's helped you
Oh, love
professionally?
it. Yes. So honestly, my first inspiration was Barbara DeAngelis. So
Yeah.
Barbara DeAngelis she's older now. She's got some stuff on Gaia and, and she's got a whole series of paperbacks. They were putting them out, mass-produced paperbacks. So you see them all over the place. But she wrote books. So here's her story. At 18, 19, she was in early in college in the early 70s, I think it was. And she saw a poster, Learn How to Meditate, and it took her down a path that she had a true full-blown consciousness experience, enlightenment experience in India as a young adult. Okay. Then she had to come back and make sense of the world, of the Western world with what she knew. And she had to kind of follow this path of, make get the book sold. So, she's got, the book is titled How to Make Love All the Time, right? So this is, what the 80s, the era in the 90s is like now we get to have more expression. We get to walk away from the old religious values and live with each other and whatever, right? So all that's coming out and she's got to figure out how do we bring true principles into this new mindset. And so she started talking about emotional intelligence, but she had to kind of frame it around, a good sex life, right? And so she did that until she didn't have to do that anymore. And then she wrote the really good books called Soul Shift and The Choice for Love.
Yeah.
And that's where she started talking about her true soul path. And it got really good. But anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, she was kind of this role model for me. I've watched and just followed for decades.
So let me
So,
ask you this. How do you balance this life of helping people? It's heavy stuff that you get into with clients. How do you balance that with your soul and taking care of yourself and doing a good job and helping them get to a better place? How does all of that, is there a philosophy of balance that goes into that every day?
oh yes, so much all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't work with clients anymore. I'm still working on what is it that I can bring to the world, and part of it is raising my frequency. So I call it frequency school. So I do trainings, and I train practitioner type model, but also just life training. And so I have something called frequency school where you learn to raise your frequency in 5 life areas. And the goal is to get to the 500 frequency. So the 5 life areas are physical health and emotional health, relationships, career and finances, and spirituality. And what I find is that when people fill out the frequency assessment and they give their answers to that, and it matches up with Dr. Hawkins' scale, which is the average on the planet is about 200 frequency. So that's, people are just treading water, they're coming up for air.
Yeah.
And a 300 frequency, well, they've got a raft.
Yeah.
They can't really go too far and it's uncomfortable, but at least they can, they might save a person or two.
Yeah.
And that's the hero kind of vibration. But beyond that is, what Barbara DeAngelis was trying to inspire people with is the emotional intelligence, the true reason for living, the higher vibe, the expansion, get out of the paycheck to paycheck world. And I had to make that choice back, 20 years ago, is to say, all right, I'm going to try private practice and, and not depend on, this paycheck. And so it's a faith journey, is really what it is. And so using those same principles in all those 5 life areas is the key. So I refer to like the rock climber. So you've got the 5 life areas, your highest area is your upper hand. And for some people that's spirituality, for some people that's finances, right? Your second highest, then your torso, and then you've got your footholds. And so if your lowest life area is finances, that's what's got to come up. If your lowest life area is your mental health, that's what's got to come up. And so that's the model I kind of use with people and I do 4 month to 8 month programs. I'm looking at getting those relaunched in the fall, but it's it's not just come in, spill your guts, go home, bill your insurance. That's not what I'm about.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it works.
Yeah.
So it's taking that whole life experience and up leveling in every area
Yeah.
because and I'm in recovery and they say kind of a slogan is, oh, you don't just have to change something, you change everything.
Yeah.
Like you got to change everything when you choose a different life. And so that's kind of what you're doing, even if you're just quitting. Yeah, I don't know that it's quitting so much as it's up leveling, but there's some grieving that goes with that,
Yeah.
like the comfort or the predictability.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Of everything that you've done and evolved into at this point in your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
Oh my gosh. That's I'll tell you what I'm working on right now, and
Yeah.
I feel good about it.
Yeah.
I'm working on a fiction series.
Okay.
So you get, author in my title. And when I was in 8th grade, I had not lived and I was afraid to live. And people would ask me, well, what do you want to do? I'd gotten past the biochemistry thing. So I'm like, I didn't know what I was wanting to be, but I remember boldly stating I wanted to be an author.
Yeah.
And I say, I state this in my origin story. And that's when the muses plunged me into my life. And I had to hit a bottom, so that's when I started using substances because I knew that something wasn't right.
Yeah.
And then that led to the spiritual awakening. And then that led to, doing a career for the real reasons.
Yeah.
But now as I kind of step back from that and look at like what would I leave? It's a fiction series. It's about a mental health actually school psychologist who goes into the mental health field and isn't able to resolve her life with the traditional box. And so she's got to get out of the box to find her answers.
Yeah.
There's a dual timeline with a little historical fiction with a woman from 1930s Germany who is working at Wilhelm Institute and has found some quantum solutions for healing and health. But the only place they have for is the anthropology department, which is led by um, basically a white supremacist. She's half Jewish and she's epileptic. And so she basically finds that her solution and his are at odds. And one, basically takes away everything she knows. And
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway,
Wonderful.
it's interesting how they dovetail and
Yeah.
find,
Absolutely.
how the story connects.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. At the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that knows you, but you're running the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Mm. That's cool.
Yeah.
So I'm doing work on my own subconscious right now. And so I found that sometimes if you have a negative belief in your subconscious that has defined you, it will be in the way of your answer. And so my answer today is different than it was 2 weeks ago before I, did this deep dive on myself. But what I know is I am not a hero. I don't have to be a hero.
Yeah.
And that is, the ego structure around that tends to be where people get, locked in. And so I've dealt with some savior complex kind of stuff. And so stepping away from that is how I'm now up leveling. But it's kind of like almost counterintuitive. Like you would think like the savior complex is the elevated, you know, you know, point of, the highest point. And it's actually stepping away from it and not being bound or held to being responsible for anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Like that's new.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. If anyone's curious, they have questions, they want to reach out, they want to hire you, any of the good business, where do they go?
So just ChristineHull.com is good. It's got my books on there and programs on there. No H in Christine. So
Okay.
it's Cristine. Hull, Hull is the last name. And it's yeah, it's a fun little place to explore. There's some freebies.
Okay.
Good stuff.
All right. I will put links out there. Christine, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Best of luck with the
Thank
writing
you.
and everything else. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Yes.
I love your questions.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, you did wonderful.
Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.